conclusion of
This meeting is being recorded.
At the conclusion of the presentation, we'll take questions.
Yep, Ron, I'm making
Okay.
you a co-host right now, so you should be
Okay.
able to share your screen. Just give me 1 second.
Okay. I think I now can do that.
Okay, you should have access.
Yep. There we go. How does that look on your end?
Looks great.
Okay. So yeah. Well, thanks, New Jersey Butterfly Club, for having me as a speaker tonight. I'm really pleased to be talking to this chapter of NABA that's right there near the well springs of NABA. So it's good. I wish I could be there in person to see what it's like. As Donna said, I was on the faculty at ASU for quite a few years, and most of my research was to do with bright coloration animals, especially butterflies. And one of the key sets of ideas that we worked with or examined in working with butterflies and their coloration were ideas that were developed by Charles Darwin in the 1800s. And these ideas have proven to be incredibly valuable and powerful over the years. And so I wanted to sort of spend some time reviewing those ideas and also talk a little bit about some of Darwin's ideas about how those ideas applied to butterflies. And in particular, the issues of butterfly mate choice and sexual selection. So what I'm going to do is spend a few minutes sort of reviewing some of these big ideas of Charles Darwin, and then move on to the specific ideas or specific suggestions that he made about butterflies and their coloration, and then sort of give you an update in terms of where we are in terms of what role mate choice plays in butterfly coloration, and also what we know about butterfly courtship behavior, which is where mate choice is going to occur, if it occurs at all. So if you'll just give me a minute, there's one thing. Oh yeah, here we are. I just need to make sure I've got one thing squared away here. Oh, here we are. I'm going to be showing some videos, and there's a setting in Zoom that optimizes its operation for showing videos. I'll forget to do this if I put it at the end. So I wanted to just acknowledge all of the people in my lab over the years and who collaborated with me and helped generate a lot of the information. These include postdoctoral associates, PhD students, various undergraduate research assistants, all of which are really, really wonderful. Also, our work has been supported by not only the National Science Foundation, but also by the local Desert Botanical Gardens, Sigma Xi, the Lepidoptera Research Foundation, which I think is now largely defunct, but supported Kim Pegram in particular when she was a PhD student. School Life Sciences, we had money from the Howard Hughes Medical Institute as well as the NIH to support some of the student participation in the various projects. So Charles Darwin really had two major works that he produced during his life. One was in 1859, The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. In 1871, The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex. And I'm going to talk about what he had to say about butterflies, but I just wanted to review the big ideas again that sort of came out of this work. One is the idea of descent with modification. And this means that the organisms that we look at on the surface of the surface now are the descendants of organisms that previously lived on the surface of the earth. And that what has happened to produce this huge diversity in life on Earth is that some ancestral organisms reproduced, had offspring, and that over time, these the offspring that were produced changed in their form. Darwin sort of did a crude depiction of this. I couldn't believe this when I found that somebody had actually used this little sketch that Darwin drew as a plan for a tattoo. But this is Darwin's at least initial conceptions of his notebook, showing this idea of descent with modification from common ancestors. And we can think about this with respect to butterflies and apply this to butterflies. And here's just a simple phylogeny for three species that occur on the Earth right now. So across the top, we have the modern species. And then, if you will, the ancestry or the pedigree in a sense, although that's usually just within a single within a few lifetimes. This goes on for millions of years. So the idea here is that there was an ancestral butterfly species that lived some 70 to 110 million years ago. Some of those dates have changed recently with some more recent phylogenetic analyses. But the idea is that you would have, I'm going to just change something here to a oops, wait a minute, hang on a second, please. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, I just wanted to create this little laser pointer that I can use. So we had some ancestral populations of butterflies that got to a certain point way back in time, and those populations diverged, they changed. One of the lineages leading to the admirals here, one of the other lineage leading up to the milkweed butterflies. And in this simple tree, there's another divergence point here that that produces on the one side the monarchs and the other the queen. So people really at the time, at Darwin's time, were not using this sort of notion of descent with modification a lot. So this was an idea that he really championed and presented a lot in his 1849 book, The Origin of Species. His other idea was about the processes that lead to evolutionary change, and in particular processes that he referred to as selection. I'll be talking both about natural selection a little bit, but mostly today about sexual selection. So again, the idea is that this phylogeny or this evolutionary tree shows a history of change in the morphology, the coloration, and the body structure of these butterflies, but it really doesn't talk about what process produced those changes. And that's where Darwin brought up this idea of natural selection as a process that can lead to changes in the features or traits of animals over time. And just to remind you that that this process occurs as a result of certain pre-existing conditions. And those conditions in the short term are that you have to have variation in traits. So you can imagine that you might have some sort of ancestral milkweed butterfly within the population. There's quite a bit of variation in their color from, let's just say hypothetically, from orange to red, orange, and yellow. And so we have variation in a trait, and if that trait is heritable, that will also be an important prerequisite for natural selection to occur. The heritability meaning that if the coloration of the offspring is very similar to that of the parents because of the genes that the parents pass on to their offspring. Also, the coloration has to be related to, this variation in coloration has to be related to variation in survival and reproduction, so that some colors would have a higher reproductive success than others. Obviously, at some point in the past, it was the orange ones that had the highest color, highest reproduction and fitness, and they have persisted and become more common in the population over time. So these are sort of the requisite conditions for selection to occur. We'll encounter these to some extent again when we talk about sexual selection. Obviously, when we're talking about evolution and natural selection acting, we're talking not only about short-term, but also long-term, these processes going along over going on over a long period of time with new sources of genetic variation and many generations of reproduction, and also changes in the environment. So the result of selection is recognized as being leading to changes in traits over time, like we see in these evolutionary trees, and also adaptation, which are traits that enhance survival and reproduction. Now, Darwin wondered, are these colors that we see in the butterflies that we all love so much a product of selection for traits that enhance survival? And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I mean, we could brainstorm some of the ways in which the color might affect survival and reproduction in butterflies. And here's just a very typical list that we see. Coloration can play an important role in escaping predation or minimizing the effects of predation through camouflage. Defensive coloration, warning colorations are an important way in which color can affect how predators learn which species are distasteful, and that will shape the evolution, the way selection acts on coloration, and how it might evolve. Mimicry is one that Charles Darwin recognized too, along with Bates and others, that organisms could gain a reproductive or survival advantage by having a coloration that looks like that of distasteful species. Thermoregulation is another one where the butterflies are ectothermic. Their body temperature is determined by the amount of solar radiation hitting their body and how much is absorbed. And in particular, melanic color can have a huge effect on that. It's one of the reasons why, as you go up an altitudinal gradient or even a latitudinal gradient, you'll find things like sulfur butterflies get darker and darker as you go along. This is so that they become more, their wings are more effective, their bodies are more effective at absorbing solar radiation. And of course, like I said, mimicry, this is one of the classic examples where warning coloration of the monarch has evolved to signal their distastefulness, to facilitate predators learning that they taste bad. Same thing with the queen butterfly here. And the viceroys have evolved color patterns that mimic those. They gain an advantage. They've evolved by natural selection, so that in The Origin of Species, Darwin said, we are led to inquire what reason can be assigned for certain butterflies and moths, so often assuming the dress of another in quite distinct form. And now we know that this business of mimicry, both Batesian and Müllerian mimicry, is something that evolves in the context of natural selection. Now, Darwin also was puzzled about sexual ornaments, brilliant coloration, extremely exaggerated traits. We've got the tail of the peacock up here. Darwin said, how could this be, this can't be of any survival value. If anything, it has to be a detriment to survival. Even the brilliant coloration of this male birdwing up here, butterfly up here, Darwin thought might be actually attract predators and thereby be a detriment to survival. Things like the weapons of this rhinoceros beetle here take energy and to produce and maintain, and so it's thought these would be a detriment to survival. So how are these evolving? And of course, we see a lot of this sort of thing in butterflies. Although by no stretch of the imagination are all butterflies sexually dimorphic, but they're not hard to find among the 20,000 species of butterflies. Some people suggest that about a quarter of all the species of butterflies demonstrate some sort of strong sexual dimorphism in coloration like this. The Diana fritillary is a classic example. It's not just larger butterflies. The blues very often are very strongly sexually dimorphic in coloration, with males having this brilliant blue coloration on the dorsal wing surface. This is common in many of the pierid butterflies. In the whites, like the checkered white, we see a pretty strong sexual difference in coloration. Very often these color differences extend as I'll talk about a little later, into the ultraviolet. They're strongly sexually different in wavelengths that we can't see. Pipevine swallowtail is another great example of a species that's sexually dimorphic. And we get this other strange phenomenon where in some species, females are polymorphic. So the eastern tiger swallowtail, the male has a sort of classic tiger swallowtail form, but the female can be either that color or might be have this black form. And so we see sexual differences where in this species, the black swallowtail, Diana fritillaria, all of which are thought to be mimics of the pipevine swallowtail, we see females with this coloration that clearly smacks of survival value in the face of predators, whereas the males don't evolve that coloration, but have these bright color patterns like the fritillaria here and the swallowtails. So Darwin wondered about this, and he proposed a process called sexual selection to explain this, and saying that males were under selection to have this bright color because it enhanced their reproductive success. And this idea was put forth in his book, The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex, where he had a whole chapter on butterflies and moths in which he put forth these ideas that the colors of many male butterflies may be understood as a product of either female choice or perhaps a product of their being advantageous in male-male aggressive interactions at territories or whatever. So again, he observed that males in animals such as butterflies often display traits that seem detrimental to survival and fitness. The greater size, strength, and pugnacity of the male, his weapons of offense or means of defense against rivals, his gaudy coloring, like this birdwing and various ornaments, his power of song and other such characters. This is what he was trying to explain. And he proposed this idea of sexual selection, which is selection for those traits, such as coloration, that contribute to success in the competition for mates. And he proposed two contexts in which this competition might occur. One is in male-male interactions, where they aggressively compete for access to females, and the other is intersexual choice or female choice. And that's the one I'm going to dwell on today. So he argued that bright coloration in butterflies evolved in the context of female choice. He highlighted male behavior that suggests also competition for mates. He also described male colors as if for display, but he really provided no direct evidence for this. He didn't do experiments to determine if female butterflies were paying attention to male coloration at all. But he sort of put together these various observations and inferred that this might be going on. So he said, if we look at this upper quote here, we have seen that their colors and elegant patterns are arranged and exhibited as if for display. Hence, I am led to believe that females prefer or are most excited by the more brilliant males. Now, at that time, this was not, this was not agreed upon by everyone. And of course, one of Darwin's main contemporaries in this field of developing ideas about evolution was Alfred Russel Wallace. And he said, Mr. Darwin, as is well known, imputed most of the brilliant colors and varied patterns of butterfly wings to sexual selection. That is, to a constant preference by female butterflies for the more brilliant males. The colors thus produced being sometimes transmitted to males alone, sometimes to both sexes. And here's the clincher. This view has always seemed to me to be unsupported by evidence, while it is also quite inadequate to account for the facts. So it was interesting that even then there was this disagreement about whether this notion of female choice in the evolution of the butterfly coloration was valid or appropriate. And what's even more interesting to me is that if we fast forward basically 100 years, there was a Biology of Butterflies symposium. Actually, it was the very first one that was held. I think the symposium was actually held in 1981, but the contributors to this symposium wrote up articles that were published in a volume called The Biology of Butterflies, that published in 1984. And as you can see, looking over in the right hand, the page on the right here, there were quite a few papers that were devoted to coloration, sexual selection, mate choice in butterflies, visual communication, sexual selection among butterflies by the late Bob Silberglied. Here's a paper by David Smith, Dick Wainwright at the British Natural History Museum, Michael Beaupre, who's worked extensively on chemical signals in butterflies. And what's kind of amazing is if we go through those articles and look at what people are saying, there's not a lot of empirical evidence that they're putting forth, but they're just saying things like Silberglied did. It is suggested that male-male, not male-female interactions, but male-male interactions may be the major selective agent in the evolution of bright coloration and iridescence in males, low variability of male coloration, and some other characteristics. David Smith, on the other hand, stated that the role of female choice is troublesome to demonstrate, but it is the most logical deduction from the analysis. And a lot of this disagreement thing then, I think, even in 1984, was largely because there was not a great deal of empirical evidence that had been gathered in the 100 years since Darwin. But I'm here to tell you today, and happy to report, that things have changed quite dramatically since 1984. I'll skip these quotes. They largely say the same thing. Michael Beaupre, though, makes a plea for urgently needed experimental investigations of mate choice. And what I can show you is here a list of papers or of species that have been studied in which there has been an effort to test this idea that females are choosing mates using visual signals. And there are others that we could probably add to this list now, but things like the orange sulfur. There are several papers, actually Silberglied was responsible for one of them, that suggests that females are actively choosing amongst males on the basis of their coloration. Silberglied and Taylor did some amazing experiments actually here in Arizona, where they transplanted pieces of wings from one butterfly, from one male butterfly to the next, to see how it affect their attractiveness to females. Diane Wiernatz did work with Pyrus pertataci, in which she used a black magic marker to alter the coloration, the melanic markings on the dorsal wing surface to see how it affected male attractiveness to females. We did experiments in which we altered the ultraviolet coloration of the males to see how that affected it. The large grass yellow, Daryl Kemp did some really nice experiments in cages in which he modified the UV reflectance of the large grass yellow to see how it affected male courtship success with females. So down here in the lower right, we see that the large grass yellow has some difference in coloration in the melanic margins between males and females, not real pronounced. But if you look at them with an imaging system that visualizes the reflectance in the ultraviolet wavelengths, we get a very dramatic difference between males and females. The males have brilliant ultraviolet reflection, iridescent ultraviolet reflection that you can see here in all of the yellow areas on the right-hand wing. Part of the reason it's only on the right-hand wing is because this reflection is directional. The camera is directly over that male. And if you move the light source to the light source in this case is on the left. If you move it to the right-hand wings would light up. So these guys have this very flashy pattern as they fly along. Females have a little bit of this ultraviolet reflectance at the base of the forewing, but it's nowhere near as extensive. And Kemp, Darrell Kemp actually did experiments in which using literally almost something like sunscreen would coat the wings of males to block out this ultraviolet reflection. And this resulted in a dramatic reduction in their mating success. All of these species have really interesting stories that can be told about how the experiments were done. I will tell you, a lot of these are cage experiments where the coloration is modified and then the cage is populated with virgin females. And then we look at how males how succeed in mating with the females, or who females accept and who they do not. And that's been done with many of these. Another way is the study that's done here in Arizona. We have these massive explosions in the populations of sulfur butterflies, orange sulfur butterflies, and you can actually go out in the field and collect mating pairs. And so what we did was collect mating pairs and then bring them back, and then also do a random sample of unmated males to compare their coloration. And we found out that the males that had succeeded in mating with females were significantly more UV reflected than were the males that had not succeeded in mating. So at this point, the evidence is pretty good. I mean, this isn't a huge number of species, and I have to concede that a great deal of this has been done in the lab or in enclosures with these animals. But I think the evidence is growing that females are actually choosing amongst males on the basis of their color, and that to that extent, Darwin was right that the male coloration in many of these species has evolved in the context of convincing females to mate with them. That is, in the context of sexual selection. Now, I want to make sure before I move on to talking about courtship behavior, that you're aware of the fact that visual signals are not the only signals that butterflies use in mate choice and that males produce to get females to mate with them. And there are a number of species: queens, small sulfur butterflies, orange sulfurs, the squinting bush brown from Africa, green-veined white, whoops, sorry about that typo. These all have all been demonstrated to produce chemical signals that have to be present for females before females will accept the male as a mate. And this is also growing, the amount of data on this point, but this is much more difficult data to get because of the difficulties of monitoring, measuring, and assessing chemical signals. But I think we can expect to see, there is quite a bit of data now. I didn't even mention the moths on chemical signals for species like Rutowski and some others, that males are subjected to sexual selection in the context of females, preferentially mating with males that produce good chemical signals. I won't talk about it today just because there's not time, but there's an important question, which is that why do females have these preferences at all? What do females gain by mating with brightly colored males? What do females gain by mating with males who produce good chemical signals? And we can maybe talk about that later, but it's a whole other topic that you can get into. Whoops, hang on, let's see here. So another area that Darwin, or feature of butterfly reproductive behavior that Darwin talked about, was their courtship. He said several males may often be seen pursuing and crowding around the same female. Their courtship appears to be a prolonged affair, for I've frequently watched one or more males pirouetting around a female until I was tired without seeing the end of courtship. Of course, there's no numbers on this. I mean, maybe Darwin tired very quickly. He was notoriously a sickly man, especially after he got back from his trip around the world. But it sort of raises an interesting question. He hadn't seen the end of courtship. So what does successful courtship actually look like? And this is something where in my lab, we worked, this is something we worked on a lot, and other people have worked on it as well. The way that it basically goes is to hand rear virgin females. In butterflies, once females mate, they're notoriously unreceptive. This doesn't go on indefinitely, but if you catch a female out in the field, chances are she won't be receptive. And like Darwin says, he didn't see the end of courtship. He didn't see a mating actually occur. So to maximize the chances of that, what people in my lab and others have done is to hand rear virgin females and then present them to males, and then observe and record the courtship behavior. So here, that's what I'm going to show you now are some videos of various sorts of courtships. I call it a sort of sampler of butterfly courtship. It'll give you a sense of the various forms butterfly courtship can take. Now, what you see here on the right is a female, a virgin female cloudless sulfur. These were done when I was a graduate student in Florida. And this piece of string here is actually tied around the base of her abdomen. And the reason we do this or did this was because we spent a lot of time rearing these virgin females, and we didn't want her to get away. And even after the male mated with her, you can take the pair, and if you separate them quickly, she continues to be receptive before the mating goes to fruition. So in these and some other pictures, you're going to see that the females are actively tethered. Now, there's an interesting question as to whether this in some way might impede courtship in some way, but we don't think it does, because probably for many of these butterflies, courtship occurs when the female is still perched or very shortly after she's taken her first flight, and they often land quickly and then the courtship ensues. So here we have, again, a cloudless sulfur. The first one I'm going to show you is the courtship in real time. So a male has approached this female, is now fluttering around her, and then he her abdomen actually appears out from between her wings. Let me see, I'm trying to see if I can, and then the male curls his abdomen around to mate with her. In this next one on the right here, what we've got is a video or a film made at less than half normal speed. Is it not? There we go. So you can see the male's slowed way down. It was shot at like 60 frames per second. He contacts the female several times, attempts to couple with her, but doesn't succeed. And so he takes the wing again, flies more around her, and then reaches his abdomen around and mates with her. And then, as you can see, he then attempts to fly away with carrying the female, but is prevented from doing so by the thread. Now, that's not what I would call a prolonged affair, to use Darwin's terminology. And in fact, we've actually timed from these films how long it is from when the male first approaches the female until he couples with her. And it's typically less than 10 seconds in this species. Now, here's another example of butterfly courtship from some work we did with the Gulf fritillary. On the left is sort of normal speed. On the right is going to be at about one half normal speed. What you're going to see is the male, who's already approached, land next to the female, and then he performs a very stereotyped clapping together of his wings. Happens very rapidly. It's hard to discern, but I hope you can see it, and it's not too choppy on the screen you're looking at. But the male does this for a while, and then he curls his abdomen around, couples with the female, and turns facing away from her. And in some cases, he also will try to fly off with the female. On the right-hand part of the screen, you'll see the same basic structure of courtship, but slowed down. So here's the male flying above the female, then he lands alongside. Now here's these claps, these wing claps. Now, if you look at this closely, you would see that the female's antenna is actually laid back between the male's forewings, and this clapping is bringing her antenna into contact with scent-producing scales, which are on the veins of his upper forewing. So it looks like this is probably involved in in delivering a chemical signal to the female in this species that is not sexually dimorphic in coloration. Again, the duration that we see is typically about 8 to 10 seconds. Another well-known example, and this is from the work of Lincoln Brower, is the queen butterfly. In queen butterflies, males have scent-producing structures at the end of the abdomen called hair pencils, and their courtship is very much involved in bringing these hair pencils into close proximity to the female's antenna. Whoops, so let's see. I think I'm going to have to. Shoot. Let's see. I need to. Excuse me for just a second. Yeah, here we go. This is at about 1/6, 1/8 normal speed. So the male, here's this female is perched. The male flies up and down in front of her head. I haven't been able to see the hair pencils coming out during this, but presumably he's bringing her and his hair pencils into contact with her antennae. In some of the Danaids, they actually have particles, cuticular particles on the hair pencils that the male is trying to deliver directly onto the female's antenna. So this would go on for a while until the male then lands alongside the female and then curls his abdomen around to couple with that of the female. Successful courtship in these guys is typicly less than a minute, about 55 seconds, according to the data that Brower puts forth in the paper. Pipevine swallowtail also has a really neat and interesting courtship behavior. What you're going to see here, again, this is about 1/8 normal speed. There's the pair. You can see them flying around. The female is to the left, the male is behind. And the male has this repeated swooping behavior where he flies up, he gets below the female, and then flies up directly in front of her. Sort of stalling almost in front of her, and as he continues upward, and then goes up over the back of the female, comes back down below her. And we call this swooping. We've described this behavior in a fair amount of detail because we're interested in the possibility of this swooping. One of the key functions of it is to make apparent to the female the iridescent blue coloration on the male's dorsal wing surface. So we've shown that females do pay attention. If you black out this iridescence on the male's dorsal wing surface, he becomes much less attractive to females. And we've done observations of the wings positioned in various ways relative to the sun as the female would see them during the courtship. And in fact, the male's behavior does make this blue and a rather dramatic flash visible to the female during the swoop behavior. I'll skip that for now. here's two of the most bizarre courtship behavior patterns, male courtship displays that I'm aware of. This one, this is the barred sulfur. I don't know if that makes it up as far as New Jersey, but it's common down in Florida and the South. And what happens is the male lands alongside the female with his wings closed. And then he, in the most amazingly asymmetric thing, pops the forewing out on the side next to the female and waves his forewing up and down in front of the female. So that's what you're going to see. This black mark here is a number that I put on this male. This, again, these were done in cages, and I was trying to keep track of the identity of the butterfly. So here you're going to see two courtship sequences, one in which the male lands alongside the female, waves his forewing around in front of her, and then you'll see her abdomen come out from between the wings, permitting him to couple with her. So there he's got the forewing out. There's her abdomen that came out, and he couples with her. Here's one that's slowed down just a little bit. So this forewing in this completely asymmetric way is waved around in front of the female. It brings the black bar. I'll just show you one thing here. That the yellow area has a very strong UV reflectance. There's the black bar, which is much more well developed in males than in females. And there are also scent producing structures in this area at the base of the forewing. So we don't really know which this is delivering, but it seems to be behavior pattern involved in the delivery of chemical and perhaps visual signals as well, or both, to the female. So I'll let this one finish up. And they couple. Copulation goes on for quite some time. His wing will eventually get, forewing will eventually get put back between the two hind wings. Another one that my colleague Krister Wiklund has described is for a rather primitive pierid butterfly that occurs in northern Scandinavia, the cryptic wood butterfly. And in this case, what happens is the male perches facing the female. This is the female here on the left, male on the right. And he actually extends his proboscis. Unfortunately, the resolution doesn't make it easy to see that. And then he waves it back and forth in front of the female in a very repetitive and stereotyped fashion. So again, if the resolution were adequate, you could actually see his proboscis is extended, and he's waving it back and forth like this from one side of the female's head to the other. It looks like he may also be encountering or contacting her antennae with that, with her proboscis. Successful courtship, this is a typical component of it, and it goes on for about 40 seconds until the male moves around and then couples with the female. If we do look at the various detailed studies of successful courtship that you can glean from the literature on butterflies, you'll see that many butterflies do not have really distinctive or stereotyped or highly repetitive courtship displays. But in the pairs, two species that do are the barred sulfur, Eurymadera, and also the dainty sulfur, Nymphalis iale. Similarly, in the nymphalids, the brushfoots, there are some species that don't have a distinctive courtship display, and others like the queen, Danaus gillipus, that has hair penciling, Agralis vanilli, which we saw the courtships videos of. They do wing clapping. The grayling in Europe has a bowing display, and various other ones. Then in the papilionids, we see we see some species have displays, some do not. So it appears that these displays are not phylogenetically conserved, as we say, but can evolve quite rapidly within these lineages. And this is, again, suggests that they're a product of sexual selection. Now, in spite of these detailed studies, there's still all kinds of questions about butterfly courtship and mating behavior. Darwin observed that some courtships are prolonged affairs, but apparently not most courtships leading to copulation. The likely thing that he saw were persistent males with unreceptive, not choosy females. But one has to wonder that if it's the case that sometimes that the males do persist, because sometimes the females do move into a state of being receptive after this courtship. But that hasn't really been seen. And in fact, these very prolonged courtships relative to the duration of most male-female interactions that you might see in the field are not very common. But there appears to be quite a bit of variation in male persistence that's not really well known or explained. In courtships leading copulation, they're mostly brief, up to perhaps a minute. So female choice can happen quite quickly. And this is even when visual signals are involved. So that, for example, in the orange sulfur, where females are paying attention to male ultraviolet reflectance, they're assessing it really surprisingly quickly. And exactly how that happens without a display is something that has yet to be really worked out. And of course, we don't really know what successful courtship with mated females looks like at this point. And this also reflects the fact that we don't really know exactly how female receptivity changes during the interval between matings. We know they will mate more than once. The variation in the form of male behavior, there's high diversity among species within families and genera, which suggests sexual selection. But one of the things we don't know, does it enhance the presentation of the signal? Or is the performance itself a signal? Do males that perform more vigorously just because of the vigor have a higher probability of success in courtship? So, and also in some species, the male is not obligatory for success. In the pipevine swallowtail, males don't have to swoop, especially if the female is already perched. In the Gulf fritillary, males don't have to do that wing clapping. Sometimes females will accept them without it. And we don't really understand why there's that sort of variation. So in conclusion, I think the evidence at this point is that Darwin was right. The bright color of males in some species of butterflies did evolve in the context of mate choice. And this is true for many non-butterfly species as well, meaning birds and a whole variety of animals that Darwin also suggested had bright coloration as a result of selection on males imposed by females. But there's still a lot to learn about exactly how these signals, what the specific features are that are important. Courtship behavior is increasingly well known, but the adaptive features and the role in mate choice still warrant further study. There's a lot to learn there. The occurrence and consequences of mate choice in the field need more attention. I'm the first to admit that a lot of these experiments have done in the lab and in these large pavilions and stuff like that. But what's going on actually out? Is this actually playing out this way in the field? And there's also thousands more species to study. There's a lot of diversity out there yet to uncover. And so I think we're all going to be busy at this for a while. So thanks for your interest and thanks for attending. And I hope you found this interesting, and I'm happy to take questions that you can post either through the chat or by raising your hand or something. So I'm going to exit the show for a while and stop sharing so I can people can see me.
That was an awful lot of information. Thank you. So who's got a question for Ron? Oh boy, nobody?
Someone has to ask a question. I'll ask one, Ron. It has nothing to do with this. So is there any takeaway I can take here from your selection experiments to help me on the dating websites?
You know, years ago, we published this paper that showed that in the orange sulfur, and I think it's because their ultraviolet reflectance degrades with age. Females were showing a preference for young males. And there are other reasons why they might gain from doing that as well. But this was picked up by the press, and I actually was interviewed by Scott Simon on Morning Edition on NPR. And what was so funny, he spent almost the whole time talking about, well, do you think there's any hope for me, a kind of middle-aged, thick set guy with not very much hair? And one of my colleagues said it was a great interview on Morning Edition, but they had no idea it was going to turn into a self-help session for Scott Simon.
Exactly. Well, the bald may increase UV reflection.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. So I don't know. I think, if baldness is a sign of age, presumably older males may have had more chances to garner resources and therefore might have a higher mating success. And these patterns of mating success, what determines mating success, do vary from species to species. Sometimes it's the older males. Sometimes it's males in the middle of the size range rather than being particularly large or particularly small. So you kind of have to look at each one individually.
Well, if no one else is going to ask something, I'm going to say something else. So like to bring up something we talked about a little bit when I saw you last week.
Yeah.
All of you that watch butterflies routinely, which is probably, I guess, everybody that's on this Zoom, although you're all black boxes to me, but knows or probably has seen that when a male is approaching a female who's saying no by like sticking her abdomen up in the air, like, and just saying, no, I don't like you. I've never ever seen a male succeed, even though he keeps trying, he keeps doing it, and he hangs around for a long time, wasting his time and his effort. And I've never seen a female say yes after she said no. And so I don't know what we can learn from that about us, but in terms of butterflies, the question is why are the males wasting all this time and effort?
Well, they're a bit more discerning than you might think, Jeff. For example, I don't know how many of you have seen these ascending flights that, for example, sulfurs engage in. You'll see a male and female come together and they'll fly along level for a while, and then they'll go up incredibly high in the sky. And it turns out that it's the female that's leading the male up, and that it gets to a certain point and he'll break off the chase and return to the ground. And we did an experiment years ago. I think I sent you a copy of the paper, Jeff, that showed that if the female doesn't go into an ascending flight, the male hangs around for longer than if she does go into ascending flight. So they appear to be somewhat sensitive to the potential costs they may incur by continuing to court a female. But that paper also showed that most male-female interactions were that did not involve copulation were actually quite brief, on a matter of a few seconds or something like that. So it's just really hard to know if those highly protracted or prolonged affairs that Darwin talked about were males are under incredible selection not to miss any opportunity to mate. And it may be that even though these females are not likely to accept them, they sort of keep after them, not because they will or are likely to be receptive, but it's just an incidental consequence of their incredible drive to mate. And that most males don't spend that much time. And in fact, we see those because they're obvious. But I encourage you, when you're going around watching, butterflying, watch male-female interactions and see what goes on in those. You know, often you'll see you know, you can see for some species it's sexually dimorphic in coloration. You can sort of watch them and interact and get a sense of what the male-female interactions look like. But I don't know, Jeff. That is a big unknown as to whether or not a male can essentially, by chasing after a female for an extended period of time, wear her out. I mean, maybe it becomes too costly for her and she'll accept the male. Or maybe he's hoping that she's right on some sort of threshold. You know, what happens is the male puts a spermatophore inside the female. It's this little cuticular wrap package of sperm and nutrients. And as the female mates and it distends her, the sac inside her where it resides, and there's stretch receptors, which cause her to become unreceptive. As she extracts the nutrients from that spermatophore and the sperm, it decreases in size, and the stimulation of those stretch receptors stop, and presumably her receptivity as a result of that returns at some point in time. But we don't know what that curve looks like. If you look at time since mating versus receptivity, it drops off. And it may be that in some cases males do get a mating because the female is really close to that edge, and after he chases her for a while, she goes down. I don't know. It's not really known. Let's see, here's a question. Why is sexual selection so one-sided, with males evolving coloration to attract females, but females not trying to attract males? There are situations in which females can evolve attractive coloration. One of the classic examples from the birds are the phalaropes, where during the breeding season, females tend to be much more brightly colored than males. I don't know how many are birders and are aware of that. And they have a rather unusual mating system. We can talk about the conditions under which it might have evolved. But in their mating system, males build the nest, males care for the young exclusively. And what females do is they go around visiting male nests, laying eggs in them. But they have to convince the male to lay that he has to permit them to lay the eggs in it. And he's the one that's put in all of this effort. And so in this case, the mate choice is sort of reversed. They call this an incidence of sex role reversal, where males are the ones making the heavier investment in the offspring and the production of offspring. And so that females are competing with other females for access to that male investment. So what's interesting in butterflies is this spermatophore that's formed inside the males. It can be quite large. I mean, you don't see it. Unfortunately, this is not something you're going to see butterflying because it's inside the female. But that spermatophore can be as much as 10 to 20% of the male's body weight. That's produced at a single copulation. And I always wow people by saying, imagine a 200-pound human male producing a spermatophore that's 10 to 20% of his body weight. You know, it's a tremendous amount of material, and it contains not only the sperm are only about 15 or 20% of the volume of the spermatophore. The rest of it is nutrients, proteins, carbohydrates, lipids that actually get absorbed out of the spermatophore by the female. Well, suddenly we've got a situation in which males as well as females are making a pretty sizable investment in during reproduction, in a single bout of reproduction. And not surprisingly, there is because of that, there is now evidence that males, there is evidence, some empirical evidence of the sort I've been describing here tonight, that suggests that males are actually, to some extent, discriminating amongst females that in terms of their signals they give off or cues they have that would suggest that they have high reproductive potential. So male butterflies tend to direct a more concerted courtship effort at young females because they have a longer expected lifespan and therefore higher reproductive potential, and also large females. Again, suggesting that higher fecundity and therefore they'll make better use or produce that their investment in the form of the spermatophore will produce more offspring. So, Jeff, back to your question, what would be interesting to see if these prolonged courtships are males with females who have these characteristics that make them really attractive and are indicators of extremely high female reproductive potential.
They look good to me. That's why I was saying.
And in the case of the checkered white butterfly, males, we believe males discriminate amongst females on the basis of their age, on the basis of the brightness of their UV reflectance. And so there is some, or the darkness, I guess it was, or yeah, the brightness. They have this, well, it's more complicated. I want to go into it right now, but yeah, females, as they age, their color degrades, their color changes, and males are apparently sensitive to that. Let's see, here's another question. Is there any research that tells the ratio of available females to males looking to mate? There are inferences made from, there are studies in which, and we've done some of these things in my lab, where we'll take virgin females out in the field, marked, mate them, and then we will leave them there and come back every day over a period of time and collect the females to see if they have remated. And you can do this because what happens is there's a spermatophore produced, and then when it decreases in size, then the female will mate again, and the second male will put a spermatophore in the bursa copulatrix, and you can find the remains of both in this sac, in this copulatory sac that the female has. And so you can actually dissect females and determine how many times they've mated during the course of their life. And for female butterflies, it varies from species to species, but we've done this with orange sulfurs and also with variable checker spots. And in both cases, it was about, the indications were, again, we had these virgin females and we didn't start to see females mated a second time until about 5 to 7 days after that initial mating. And we had very similar results with the orange sulfur. So where was I going with it? Oh yeah, so ratio of events. So this suggests that at any given time, maybe I don't get, if females live about 10 to 15 days, maybe out there at any given time, there are virgin females that will be available and some second females. But the point, I guess the point I should just drive to immediately is that you can mate a male one in the morning, and then you after that mating's over, re-release him and put another virgin female in front of him, and he will mate again. And the next day he would mate again. So the indications are that males, the sex ratio is thought to be about equal. It doesn't look that way. We tend to see, as we're butterflying, males a lot more frequently than females because males are engaged in much more conspicuous activities of flying around searching for females and courting them, whereas females tend to be flying lower to the ground, looking for good oviposition sites and whatnot, much less conspicuous. And so it's known among collectors that your males are much easier to collect than females. And I think it's true for butterflies too, that it's easier to see males often than females. For example, the empress, these hackberry butterflies where males perch on trees and the ground. I mean, they're easy to watch and observe, the clickers, but try and find a female to look at. Much more difficult proposition. So I think the general point here is that the ratio of available receptive females to available receptive males is very, very low. That is, there are many fewer females out there ready and willing to mate than there are males out there ready and willing to mate. But I don't have a hard, fast number on that.
So I have another, you have any thought about this? It's not common, but again, you spend enough time in the field. I've seen it many times, that especially among grass skippers, where you'll get a male, fiery skipper trying to mate with a male, persistently trying to mate with a male's whirlabout or sachem or something like that.
Yeah.
You have any thought about that?
Well, there are, the literature is peppered with observations of interspecific matings, Jeff. I mean,
No, this is male and male though. Yes, interspecific mating. Yes,
Oh.
I've seen a picture of a pixie with like a queen or something. I mean, different families. But no, this is male on male, and not like not fleetingly.
Are you talking about actually landing on them and
Land?
couple with them?
No, but I've never seen any succeed in mating.
No, but I mean, even attempting. I mean,
yes, attempting, curling their abdomen around persistently.
Yeah. Again, males are so driven as a result of selection, to not miss any opportunity to mate, that I can imagine there could be some circumstances where they would, go after another male. Maybe that male has somehow produced some, or has not been successful at producing the signal that says, hey, I'm a male. That is one of the ideas out there, for example, you saw Silberglied mention that male-male interactions, he thought, were a key venue for, or context for selection on male coloration, that males are so, that having a signal, a UV signal that deters other males has a strong selective advantage. And that's the context in which it's evolved. And I think that in general, butterflies are very good at not only species discrimination, but also sexual discrimination. And some of that can be based on color. So I don't know, when you see instances like that, you do sort of wonder what's going on there, but it's probably, I think they're so rare, they're the kind of thing that's very difficult to empirically study. But they look like they're probably just cases of mistaken identity. Yeah.
Any other questions for Ron?
Yeah, I have a question. How many times can a female lay a different set of eggs, and how far apart, what intervals between them within a season?
Yeah. This is Peter, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Peter, it's very hard. It's like when people ask me, how long do butterflies live? Well, it's very, very hard to make a general statement about that because with 20,000 species of butterflies evolving in all kinds of different habitats and with all kinds of different body sizes and stuff, there's just tremendous variation. And we've seen that in the animals we've worked with. Something like the variable checker spot, they'll produce a mass of, I think it was somewhere close to 50 to 100 eggs at a single sitting. And then they won't lay any eggs if you keep them in a cage with the appropriate food plant and everything for 2 days. And then 2 days later, they'll produce another huge mass of eggs. And in contrast, many butterflies, like I don't know any of the Pierids that lay eggs in masses. They tend to fly around, lay an egg here, and then maybe another one 5 or 10 minutes later here, and another one there. the numbers that we see are that during the course of a female's life, they will lay somewhere, I don't know, I think it's sort of typical number between 200 and 300 or 400 eggs. But the pattern of how those are distributed in time, whether or not they're clustered, patch butterflies lay these huge clusters of eggs. It's just tremendously variable from one species to the next. On this point of the spermatophore, I will say one other thing, which is that the general case in butterflies is that the eggs that they laid are fertilized by the last male to mate with them. So there's a phenomena, if you think about it, males are going to produce a spermatophore. They want to be guaranteed that all those nutrients are used to, fund or create eggs that they've fertilized. So there's this link between the production of a spermatophore and females become unreceptive, and if they do remate, they use the male. It's called second male sperm precedence. So. Does that answer your question?
Sure.
Okay, anybody else with questions? Okay, I think you've got them all.